Hey everyone, today I want to go through this game between Stockfish and Leela Chess0. It was played in the AlphaZero simulation match on chess.com, and it was a blitz game, 10 minutes with 5-second increment. In this game, Stockfish was playing with the white pieces and Leela was playing with black. And our spoiler alert, she does actually defeat Stockfish in 69 moves. So we'll see what happened anyway. So Stockfish played d4, and this was the book move, so these are forced moves. Knight to f6, c4, Nimzo Indian with e6, knight c3, bishop b4, and then white plays e3, black plays c5, bishop to d3, and then knight to c6, and after knight to f3, takes on c3, pawn takes, and d6. This is the end of the book, so from here on in, both the engines are playing the moves, and Stockfish's first move technically is e4 here, gaining some more space in the centre, and straight away actually Leela contests with e5, attacks d4 twice, but now Stockfish just locks down the position and plays d5, and already we have a completely blocked centre. However, this could actually favour black, because it's better to have knights in blocked positions rather than bishops. And if we look at white's bishop on d3, it's going to be a very hard piece to manoeuvre. It can be very tricky for white to place that somewhere good. So in the game, knight to e7 is played, obviously because the knight is attacked. Stockfish castled kingside, and Leela plays h6, controls g5, stops the bishop from jumping in. Knight to e1 was played, white wants to play f4, and Leela stops this with g5, and now controls all the dark squares as well. So you have to say, I actually prefer black in this opening because they've got two knights, and it's very easy to play for black. They control a lot of squares. So anyway, Stockfish continues at a4, trying to grab some space, which makes a lot of sense. But Leela's moves are quite simple, just knight to g6, going to hop the knight into h4 or f4. So logically, Stockfish just plays g3 to control those two squares. Bishop h3 from Leela attacks the rook. White's forced to block this with knight to g2. And Leela gains space as well with a5, stops white pushing that pawn up the board. Rook b1 is played, attacks the pawn on b7. Leela defends with b6, and Stockfish just unpins their rook, rook e1. And this is what I mean in these positions. Leela has the free ability now just to play king to d7. The king is easily very safe, doesn't need to castle. And after knight to e3, just plays king to c7, and it's actually a very safe piece there. There's not really much white can do to attack it, and the king actually does a very good job of protecting the b6 pawn. So Stockfish plays king h1, gets their own king into safety in the corner of the board. The bishop comes back to d7, which hits the a4 pawn. Of course it's still protected, and Stockfish now just manoeuvres the pieces. Rook to e2 is played. Leela protects b6 once again because now the rook swings over to attack it, and now Leela just plays rook to g8, gets behind this g pawn, maybe prepares an attack. Knight g2 is played by Stockfish. Queen to e8, two pieces attacking a4. Stockfish protects with bishop to c2. But this bishop looks quite overloaded, and it could become a problem because it's protecting both e4 and now a4. So if black can start gaining some attacking potential around this side of the board, then white could be in some trouble. Queen f8 was played by Leela, king to g1 was played, and queen to g7, queen to f1, and after queen f1 actually white made a bit of a blunder because now black has the ability to play knight to f4. The point being now is that if pawn takes f4, black can recapture with pawn takes f4, threatening to play f3 or bishop to h3, and if the king sidesteps this with king to h1, then bishop h3 anyway because the knight is still pinned against the queen. So if white did take and g takes f4 was played, white's probably got to play f3 here, and after bishop h3, bishop d3 to protect the knight with the rook, but now black can just calmly play queen g5 after rook to f2, rook to g6, white can protect again with rook b to b2, but after h5, queen e2 and h4, king h1 and knight to h5, black's plan is pretty simple. It's going to put the rook over to this side of the board, and they have like knight g3 ideas, and it's going to be very hard for white to defend this position. Basically it's a block position, and this bishop are terrible, and basically black's got all the potential here to win the game. A similar thing happened in the game though. So knight to f4 was played. Stockfish now played f3 instead of taking the knight off the board. Leela continued though with bishop h3 pins the knight on g2, forcing white to take this knight off. So pawn takes is played, pawn takes is played, and we get a very similar position to that variation I just mentioned. So the bishop's pinning this knight, and the queen and rook battery are against it as well. Forces Stockfish to play bishop to d3 to protect the knight. Leela continues with queen to g5. Stockfish plays rook to d2. And after h5 plays rook b to b2. Again, a double battery to protect the knight on g2. But let's just see how Leela deals with this position. So she's sacked a piece for the attack. Let's see how she deals with it. So h4 is played. Queen to e1. Just rook to g7, preparing to double rooks. Stockfish sidesteps their king, which makes a lot of sense. And Leela just doubles, or triples as you might say, on the g file. Rook f2 is played. And now knight to h5, maybe preparing to jump in to g3 with a sacrifice. Queen d1 by Stockfish. The bishop retreats back to d7, and Leela suddenly reveals her plan. It's to play the move h3, which makes a lot of sense, as we'll see. So queen b3 is played. Stockfish counterattacks briefly. Leela protects the b pawn. Queen c2 is played, and now comes h3, where if the knight moves, then Leela can play queen g1 checkmate. So the knight is pretty much forced to stay where it is. Stockfish plays queen to b1. Black could potentially take on g2 here, but after rook takes g2, queen h4 is still fine, and takes on g7, knight takes g7. Black's really got a winning position. However, in the game, what Leela played was much better. After queen b1, just played bishop takes a4, wins a free pawn. The bishop comes back to f1 to protect the knight. Leela puts the bishop back to d7, and Stockfish just manoeuvres their bishop backwards, and Leela plays queen to f6. Now, it looks as though maybe white could potentially just move the knight off the g-file here with knight to e1, but Leela could just double rooks, threatens mate on g1, and if rook f1 to protect, again, Leela can just play queen to g5, and has a triple attack, and will probably sacrifice a queen on g1 to deliver a checkmate. So in the game, again, Stockfish went back with bishop to f1. Queen h6 was now played. The king went to g1, and now Leela's managed to move the knight back to f6. King h1 is played, and finally she does take on g2. Rook takes g2, rook takes, and now just queen to h5, hitting the pawn on f3. And it's going to be really hard for white to now hold this position, especially with a passed a pawn for Leela. So queen d3 protects f3, but now comes knight to h7. The bishop went to e2, again protecting the f3 pawn, but now knight g5, and this is always going to be a permanent problem for white to protect this f pawn now. Stockfish goes backwards, and now just rook h8, a double battery against the king, and again white's just defending this position now, hoping to draw the game. Rook f2 was played. Leela plays a4, a pass pawn, bishop to a3 to block it, and queen h4 from Leela, so attacking the rook on f2. Stockfish protects the rook, queen c2. Leela just plays f6, a bit of a waiting move, just a very solid position. Look how solid Leela's position is here though. All these pawns on dark squares, blocks this bishop on a3, and white's own pawns also block their own bishop on f1. So this is a very nice position to be in. So rook g2 was played by Stockfish. Leela went queen h5, attacking f3 again. There's no way to hold it really. Bishop c1, knight takes f3, queen f2, and then just knight back to g5, wins another pawn. Stockfish attacks with bishop to e2. Leela just goes queen h7. There's no real problems here. Bishop to d1, and now bishop to h3, attacking the rook. And if rook to g1 here, queen takes e4 is devastating. So basically white is now forced to give up the exchange. Rook takes knight, pawn takes, and king to g1. And now Leela is just crushing. She plays g4. Bishop d2 is played, and then a3. And after a few more moves, This is just simply crushing. G3 takes, and queen to F3, and Leela gets another queen after A2. Bishop takes G3 and then gets a queen. And after a few more moves, takes D6, king to B7, D7, and Leela finishes the job here. Rook G8 check, king F2, queen to A2 check, the bishop blocks, queen H4, another check, king E3, after queen G5, queen F4 takes, king to D3 and queen F to D2. On move 69, Leela delivers checkmate. And that's a story of how Leela 69'd Stockfish. I think this is one of my favourite games, played between these two engines. Very nice position by Leela, very blocked position. The kind of positions I actually quite love. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed my analysis of this game. If you did, please do drop a like, comment or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.